Your card's frozen. Embarrassing, isn't it?
You froze it just to humiliate me?
Maybe now you'll remember who provides.
You just froze the owner's card.
Sign it. This marriage is finished.
After 12 years, that's all I am?
You came with nothing, leave with nothing.
Tomorrow, you'll learn what was mine.
She controls 61% of this bank.
You own Sterling National?
I never needed your money, Derek. I only needed your love.
He froze her card at the table while his mother laughed and his mistress raised her glass. The restaurant went quiet. Strangers stared. Celeste didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't drop her eyes. She only reached into her purse and felt for the small brass compass at the bottom. The one her grandmother had rested in her hand 3 years ago. The one that had traveled with her through every hard year and every quiet victory since. She knew exactly where North was. He had no idea she was the reason that card existed. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. But to understand that night, you need to know who was sitting at that table and what she had quietly built while no one was watching. The restaurant was called The Meridian. White linen tablecloths, candles in low crystal holders, a pianist in the corner playing something unhurried. The kind of place where the menu didn't list prices because the assumption was that anyone who needed to ask didn't belong. Celeste had reserved the table 3 weeks in advance. She had chosen the wine, arranged the flowers, and confirmed the guest count herself. She had done it all for Derek, her husband of 12 years, because he had just been named Senior Vice President at Prescott and Hale Wealth Management, and Celeste had always celebrated him. That was the kind of woman she was. She celebrated people. She had been celebrating Derek since the day she met him, long before he had a title to go with his ambitions. The guests arrived first. Derek's mother, Diane Monroe, swept in wearing a dress that announced itself and took the chair nearest to the head of the table without being asked. Derek's sister Kim slid in beside her, phone already in hand, scanning the room with the particular alertness of someone who was always looking for content. A few of Derek's colleagues filled the remaining seats with the easy confidence of people accustomed to being welcomed. Celeste sat across from the empty chair Derek had claimed for himself. She was wearing a navy dress she'd owned for 4 years. It was well-made and quietly elegant. Diane looked at it from across the table and made a soft sound in the back of her throat that wasn't quite a word. "That's the dress you wore to Marcus's retirement dinner," Diane said. "Conversational. Pleasant. Knife-sharp," Celeste smiled. "It's a good dress, it is," Diane agreed. For a Tuesday, Kim caught that and bit her lip to hold back a grin. Derek arrived 15 minutes late. He walked in with the particular energy of a man who had just heard good news about himself. Shoulders back, face open, a new shine on everything. Celeste felt something warm move through her when she saw him. She had loved him for a long time. She loved the shape of him even now, even when things between them had begun to calcify in ways she couldn't quite name, but felt every morning when she woke up beside him. And then the door opened again, and a woman walked in, Adrienne Cole. She worked with Derek. That was how she had been introduced to Celeste months ago, at a firm gathering that Celeste had attended, and mostly spent in conversation with a senior partner's wife about orchid cultivation. Adrienne was tall, put together in the specific way of women who have studied the impression they make. She came straight to the table. She put her hand on Derek's shoulder, the way you touch something that already belongs to you. "Hope it's okay I swung by," she said to the table, which meant she said it to everyone except Celeste. Derek mentioned the celebration. Celeste had not been told. Adrienne took the empty chair next to Derek. Their shoulders touched. When she laughed at something he said, she leaned toward him. Diane watched this with an expression of deep satisfaction. Kim began recording. The dinner proceeded. The food arrived and was beautiful, and largely ignored in favor of the undercurrent running beneath the table. Diane made 2 more comments about Celeste's dress. Kim asked Celeste sweetly what she did all day now that they were so settled. Adrienne listened more than she spoke, but managed, in the listening, to make Celeste feel like a piece of furniture someone was considering replacing. Celeste ate. She smiled when appropriate. She spoke when asked. She watched. There was a specific skill to what she did, though nobody at that table would have recognized it as skill. It looked like passivity. It looked like a woman absorbing insults because she had nowhere else to go. But Celeste had learned the difference between reaction and response long before any of them had made their first significant decision. She was watching. She was listening. She was remembering. Then the check arrived. Derek reached out and touched the waiter's arm for the trust Celeste. "Let my wife handle this one," he said. He said it lightly, casually, like it was a small joke between old friends. "She manages the household accounts." The table shifted, a subtle recalibration. Diane lifted her chin. Kim's thumb moved on her phone screen, slow. Celeste set her card on the tray without hesitation. The waiter walked away with it. The conversation at the table filled the gap. Adrian said something that made Derek laugh. Diane made a remark about the wine selection that landed sideways in Celeste's direction. 2 minutes passed. 3. The waiter returned. He leaned down and spoke quietly near Celeste's ear. Before she could respond, Derek's voice crossed the table, loud enough to carry to the tables around them. "Declined?" He raised his eyebrows in theatrical surprise. "Celeste, baby, are we having a money problem again?" The piano kept playing. The room did not. The particular quiet room full of strangers who have just witnessed something they shouldn't have settled over them like weather. Diane's hand went to her chest. Not in dismay, in pleasure. Kim's phone came up, steady, quiet, recording. Adrian put her napkin to her lips. Derek spread his hand across the table like a man performing generosity in front of an audience. "Does anybody want to help her out? Come on, she just needs a little." Celeste did not crumble. She did not argue or cry or reach across the table and upend the evening in the way the moment seemed to demand. She set her napkin on the table with the same careful hands that had, that same morning, authorized a $180 million capital reallocation at a bank that occupied 6 floors of a glass tower, 15 blocks from where they were sitting. Then a man in a black suit appeared at her elbow. He was the manager of the Meridian, a composed man, silver at his temples, the kind of face that had handled 10,000 difficult moments and learned which ones were actually difficult. He leaned down and spoke to Celeste in a register too low for the table to catch. His hands, when he set a small slip on the table in front of her, were not entirely steady. "Ma'am," he said, "my sincerest apologies. I didn't recognize you when you arrived. Is there anything this evening we can do to make things right?" Celeste signed the slip without looking up. "Everything is fine," she said. "Thank you." The manager withdrew. He moved the way people move when they are in the presence of someone they answer to, though no one at the table noticed the difference. Derek was still smiling. His mother was still watching. His sister was still recording. Celeste reached into her purse and felt for the compass. Small, brass. Worn smooth on one side from years of her thumb finding it in the dark. The needle, as always, held true. Later, in the parking lot, under the cold light of a clear Atlanta night, her phone rang. She looked at the number. One of 4 people in the world who had it. She answered on the second ring. "Set the meeting," she said. "National Schnall. Wednesday. Make sure the board is there." She ended the call. She stood there for a moment, keys in her hand, the city moving around her with complete indifference to what had just happened or what was coming. Then she got in her car and drove home in the dark. The house was quiet when Celeste got home. Derek's car was already in the driveway. He had left the restaurant shortly after her, which meant he had spent less than 10 minutes with the same people he'd spent months curating his image for. She noted this without attaching meaning to it. She had learned not to attach meaning to the small things. You could drive yourself mad attaching meaning to the small things. She went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood at the window looking out at the yard. A maple tree, old and wide, that she had looked at from this window for 7 years. It was the first thing she had loved about the house, not the kitchen or the layout or the neighborhood. Just that tree, and the way it moved in the wind like it was thinking. She reached into her purse and set the brass compass on the counter. Nana Bayad had given it to her on a Tuesday in late October, in the 4th floor room of a hospital in Huntsville, Alabama, 3 days before she died. Celeste had been 22 and had never felt so close to the floor in her life. Beatrice Whitmore had pressed the compass into her granddaughter's hands with the grip of a woman who still had things left to say and not enough time to say them carefully. "True North doesn't shout, baby," she had said. "It just is. And everything else lines up around it, eventually. You don't have to announce where you're going, you just have to know." The compass was old. The brass was warm from years of being carried, worn smooth on the side, where Celeste's thumb always rested. The needle still moved, still settled, still pointed. Celeste had never once used it to navigate geographically. She had used it for everything else. She had used it when she was 24 and sitting in a studio apartment in Atlanta with $4,000 and one idea she couldn't stop thinking about: a regional real estate fund built around undervalued commercial properties that every established firm was too conservative to touch. She had used it when the first bank said no, and the second said no, and the third laughed. She had used it when a small seed capital arrangement with a Birmingham pension fund finally said yes, and she had stayed up until 4 in the morning modeling the deal on a laptop that overheated if she plugged it in too long. Whitmore Capital Group had grown from that one fund. Slowly, precisely, deliberately. Real estate to private equity to a controlling stake in Sterling National Bank. Acquired over 5 quiet years through a series of transactions that made the business press but not the social press, because Celeste was careful about what kind of attention she invited. Nana Bea had taught her that too. Loud money is weak money. The strongest structures don't advertise their foundations. She had met Derek 6 years into building it. He had been a junior analyst at a mid-tier investment firm, hungry and smart, and possessed of the kind of conviction that looks indistinguishable from arrogance until you find out whether the work backs it up. She had met him at an Atlanta Chamber event, the kind of event Celeste attended specifically because the people she needed to know quietly often ended up in the corner at events like that, watching over the room. Derek was in the corner. He was watching the room. He had a plan for his career mapped out on a napkin in his jacket pocket, and he showed it to her, embarrassed, when she asked what he was thinking about. She had loved that napkin. She had loved that he was embarrassed to show it, and showed it anyway. She married him 3 years later, under her married name, in a small ceremony that his family attended, and that no financial reporters attended, because no financial reporters had any reason to connect Celeste Monroe to Whitmore Capital. She kept her professional life entirely separate. She told him she had an inheritance from her grandmother. She told him she managed private investments. Both were true in the way that a lake is true when someone calls it a pond. The information was accurate, the scale was not. She had not told him the whole truth for a reason she could defend in the early years. She wanted to be known before being known for something. She had watched what money did to relationships, how it rearranged the power, how it made people see the money instead of the person, how it created a particular kind of distance that looked like closeness but wasn't. She wanted Derek to choose her first, just her, before the numbers. He had chosen her, and for the first 8 years she believed that choice. The change was gradual. That was the thing about the kind of erosion that happens in a marriage. It rarely announces itself. There's no single day when you can look back and say, "There, that was the day everything shifted." There are only the small accumulations. The way he stopped asking about her day somewhere around year 9. The way he started describing her to new acquaintances as my wife with a pause before it, a pause that said she was defined by the relationship and not by anything specific to herself. The way he stopped being curious. She had thought for a while that it was the shown process, the tension of it, the long hours, the uncertainty. She had been patient, she had given him room. That was what she did. She gave people room because she believed most people, given room, would find their way back to who they were. Derek had used the room for something else. She had known about Adrian before tonight. Not with evidence, with the particular knowledge that a woman develops when she has been paying attention to someone for 12 years, and something in the pattern starts to shift. The new energy he carried home some evenings. The phone turned face down on the nightstand. The way he laughed differently on certain calls, a laugh she recognized from their early years, the laugh he used to give only to her. She had said nothing. She had waited to see what she was actually dealing with. Tonight had told her. The back door opened. Derek came into the kitchen in the clothes he'd worn to dinner, jacket off, collar open. He moved to the refrigerator like a man who was comfortable in his own house, which was the entire point. He poured himself water. He didn't look at her. "Dinner went fine," he said. Not to her, to the refrigerator door. "It did," she said. "Sorry about the card thing." He said it like he was mentioning a traffic light. "You should call the bank, probably something on their end." He walked past her and out of the kitchen. She stood at the window for another minute after he left. The maple tree was still. The night was still. The compass on the counter held its needle steady, the way it always did. She picked it up. She put it back in her purse. Somewhere in the house, in a room she was no longer invited into by feeling if not by physics, she heard Derek's voice drop to the low, warm register she had once believed was reserved for her. He said a name, one syllable. She didn't need two. She went to bed in the guest room that night without making a decision about anything, because she had learned a long time ago that the decisions that mattered were not the ones made in the heat of pain. Those decisions she would save for the morning. The morning, when it came, found her calm. There is a specific kind of clarity that arrives when you stop hoping you're wrong about something. It doesn't feel like relief. It doesn't feel like grief exactly, either. It feels like the moment your eyes adjust in a dark room, not comfortable, but honest. You can finally see what was there the whole time. Celeste had been adjusting for weeks. The evidence was not dramatic. It never is in the beginning. A lunch receipt she found in his jacket pocket while looking for his dry cleaning tag, a restaurant she didn't know, midday on a Tuesday for two. A fragrance on his collar that was not her fragrance, and not something she had ever seen in their bathroom cabinet. A change in his phone habits that started small and became consistent. Screens face down when he set it on surfaces, taken into the bathroom when it rang in the evenings. She didn't confront him with any of it. She catalogued it. This was not passive response. It required a particular kind of stillness to sit with what you knew, and to choose not to act until you understood the full shape of the thing. Celeste had learned this approach from 14 years of deal-making, the discipline of not tipping your hand before you knew every card at the table. She applied it now to the most personal table she had ever sat at. At the same time, the professional world continued to turn. On a Thursday morning, 3 days after the dinner at the Meridian, Celeste sat in her home office. A room Derek had never had any reason to enter, a room she kept locked not from secrecy but from the habit of separation, and read through the weekly report from Evelyn Ward. Her legal advisor and the only person in Atlanta who knew the full picture of what Whitmore Capital was. The numbers were strong. Sterling National's Q3 position was exactly where she had projected it. A regional acquisition she had been considering for 2 years was finally ready to move forward, pending one last round of board approval. She read the report, made her notes, sent 3 replies, and locked the office behind her when she left. She went to make coffee in the kitchen, where Diane Monroe was sitting at her table, uninvited, having apparently let herself in with the key Derek had given her 3 years ago. Diane had a way of filling a room that had nothing to do with her physical size. She was a compact woman, but she carried herself with the specific authority of someone who had decided long ago that the world owed her a seat at every table. She looked up when Celeste entered with the expression of a woman who had been waiting. Derek said, "You've been a little unsettled," Diane said. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug she had made herself from Celeste's coffee after the dinner. "I'm fine," Celeste said. "He worries about you." Diane said this in the tone of a woman who was conveying the opposite. "He's at a new level now, Celeste. The people he's dealing with, the expectations. It's a lot for anyone, but it's especially a lot for a woman to understand from the outside." Celeste poured her coffee. She didn't respond. "I'm just saying," Diane continued, "that a man like Derek needs a partner who can move with him. Keep up. You know," she smiled, gentle as a blade, "you've always been good at keeping the home. That's not nothing, But there's more to this stage of his life now than what happens at home. The coffee was good. Celeste took her time with it. "Thank you for your thoughts," she said finally. That afternoon, a firm event, Prescott and Hale's quarterly client appreciation reception, held in one of the downtown hotels. Derek had mentioned it twice in passing, never once suggesting Celeste attend, which meant she had decided to. Not to make a statement, she had attended before. She would attend now. She was still his wife. She wore a charcoal dress she rarely brought out, not flashy, but the kind of garment that required no additional effort. She arrived a few minutes into the reception and found Derek already in the center of the room, already orbiting Adrian Cole, already demonstrating the specific body language of two people who have forgotten how to pretend. Adrian noticed Celeste before Derek did. Something moved behind her eyes, a quick recalibration, and then she smiled, wide and warm, the smile of a woman who had decided to own the room, including the wife standing at its edge. "Celeste." Adrian crossed to her. "What a nice surprise. Derek said you don't usually come to these." "I try to make it when I can," Celeste said. Adrian tilted her head. "You must be so proud of him. SVP at his age. That doesn't happen for just anyone, a beat. It takes a very specific kind of support system behind a man like that." She said it the way someone says a kind thing that is also a territorial marker. Celeste received it the way she received most things, with a smile that didn't require her to give anything away. Later, near the bar, she overheard Derek telling a senior partner about the card situation at the Meridian. He had turned it into an anecdote, a gentle, self-deprecating story about household budget mix-ups that made people laugh and made Celeste sound pleasantly disorganized. The senior partner laughed. Derek looked pleased. Adrian, standing close, touched Derek's arm when the laughter peaked. Celeste set her glass down on a passing tray. She said her goodbyes to 3 people she knew and left before Derek noticed her go. On the drive home, she thought about Prescott and Hale's primary credit facility. Sterling National had been providing institutional financing to the firm for 6 years. It was a clean, standard arrangement, not unusual, not exclusive, but it was there. The firm's capacity to operate at the level it operated at was, in part, because of decisions made in boardrooms that Celeste had walked out of calmly many times. Derek didn't know that. He had no idea that the partnership that had given him his SVP title ran on money that, at its source, had her name attached to it. She drove home in the dark, windows down, the compass in her purse against her hip. She thought about something Nana Bea used to say, near the end, when she was very tired and very honest. The cruelest thing you can do to a person is take from them what they built, and then look them in the eye like they built nothing. At home, the lights were off. Derek's car was gone. She didn't go to bed for a long time. She sat in the kitchen and thought carefully about what she was going to do next. Not out of anger. Anger was an expensive fuel, and she had always been careful with what she spent, out of necessity. Because some things, once you have fully seen them, can't be unseen. And the question she was now facing was not whether something was wrong. The question was how much longer she was going to wait to acknowledge it. She picked up her phone. She texted Evelyn Ward. "Call me in the morning. Early." Then she put the phone down, face up, and listened to the house settle around her in the dark. The thing about Adrian Cole was that she operated with a confidence that came from believing she had already won. Celeste recognized the posture. She had seen it before, not in women doing what Adrian was doing, but in certain kinds of investors, the ones who made a large bet, and then started acting as though the outcome was already settled. It was a dangerous way to operate. The market had a way of responding very precisely to that particular form of arrogance. Adrian began coming to the house the following week. The first visit was on a Monday afternoon. Celeste was in the kitchen when she heard the front door, Derek's key, Derek's footsteps, and then another set of footsteps that were not Celeste's. She stood at the kitchen counter and waited. Derek came in first. He saw her, and something moved across his face too quickly for her to name it. "Adrian needed to drop off some project files," he said. "We're working on the Harrington account." "Of course," Celeste said. Adrian came in behind him. She was carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a perfume that announced itself. She moved through the entryway and into the living room with the proprietary ease of someone who had been told, either in words or in atmosphere, that she was welcome here. She set the portfolio on the coffee table. She picked up a framed photograph from the bookshelf, Celeste and Derek at a friend's wedding, 5 years ago, and studied it for a moment before setting it back down, slightly off-center. Celeste watched this from the doorway. "Nice house," Adrian said to no one in particular, very quiet. She looked at Celeste with an expression that was technically a smile. Must be peaceful, having so much time to enjoy it. They stayed for 45 minutes. Celeste made coffee she didn't offer to Adrian. Derek did not ask why. When they left, Adrian's hand brushed Derek's lower back in the doorway briefly, in the specific way of someone who wants the wife to see it but cannot be directly accused of intending it. The door closed. The house was quiet. Celeste went to her office, locked the door behind her, opened her laptop, and reviewed 2 pending decisions for the quarterly board session at Sterling National. She approved both. She sent the responses to Evelyn. Then she sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk and let herself feel very precisely what she was feeling, because it was important to know the difference between pain you should act on immediately and pain that needed to be allowed to clarify first. What she felt was not panic. It was not desperation. It was something older and slower. The particular grief of watching a structure you built carefully come apart at a seam you had always known was there. She had known, somewhere under everything, that this was a possibility. She had loved Derek in the full knowledge that he was capable of this, capable of it the way any person is capable of their worst choices under the right combination of pride and proximity and the wrong kind of validation. Knowing it was possible had not made it less painful when it arrived. She closed the laptop. She picked up the brass compass from the corner of her desk where she sometimes left it during work hours. She held it until the weight of it settled into her palm, until the needle stopped swaying. True north, always. 3 days later, Diane arrived with boxes. Not suitcases, not movers. Just Diane, in a car full of folded cardboard boxes, and the brisk energy of a woman who had been given, or given herself, a mandate. She carried them in through the front door while Derek was at work, which Celeste noted because it meant Diane had chosen to do this when there would be no witness to how Celeste responded. "I'm just getting some of Derek's closet space organized," Diane said, setting a box down on the bed in the primary bedroom. "He says he's been feeling crowded. We're going to move some of your things to give him more room to breathe." Celeste stood in the doorway. "This is my room," she said, steady. "Even." "Of course it is," Diane said, the way you say of course to someone you're not actually listening to. She had already opened the closet and was running her hand along Celeste's side of the hanging clothes. "You have so many things, Celeste. Have you thought about a storage unit?" Derek really does need the space. Celeste stepped into the room. She moved to the closet and closed it. "Please don't touch my things," she said. Diane's expression shifted. Not anger, something more refined than anger. The look of a woman recalibrating her approach. "I'm only trying to help," Derek asked. "Derek can talk to me directly," Celeste said. "This is not a project I've authorized." Diane picked up an empty box and held it like she had forgotten what it was for. For a moment, in the very small space of that pause, Celeste could see her clearly, not as a formidable opponent, but as a woman who had spent so long managing her son's image that she had begun to believe managing it was the same as loving him. Diane left the boxes. She left the house. She did not say goodbye. That evening, Kim posted something to the family group chat, a caption that read "big changes coming" with an emoji Celeste chose not to interpret. Within the hour, notifications from the chat started appearing. An aunt she'd met once, 2 cousins, a few names she didn't recognize, laughing reactions, heart reactions, a GIF she didn't watch. Celeste turned her phone over. She went to her office. She wrote an email to Evelyn Ward that was 6 sentences long and contained specific instructions that had nothing to do with divorce. Then she went to bed in the guest room with the compass on the nightstand beside her, and she slept better than she had in weeks, not because things were better, but because she had finally made the decision she had been building toward. Some decisions, once made, are simply restful. She had decided to stop waiting for Derek to find his way back to who he was. What she was going to do instead was much more deliberate than that. Derek sat her down at the kitchen table on a Friday morning. He was wearing a suit. That detail registered before anything else, the deliberateness of it, the fact that he had dressed for this conversation the way you dress for a meeting where you want to hold the authority. The table between them was the same table they had eaten breakfast at for 7 years. The same table where she had spread his business plans when he was still an analyst, and they had worked through the numbers together, her pen moving fast and quiet while he talked, and she listened and built the structure that would hold the thing he was dreaming about. He set a folder on the table. "I think we both know what this is," he said. She looked at the folder. She looked at him. "I think we should end it," he continued. He had practiced this or something close to it. His voice was measured in the way that voices are measured when someone has rehearsed being calm. "It's not working. It hasn't been working. I think you know that." She didn't speak. "I've spoken with my attorney," he said. "The arrangement is reasonable. You'll have 60 days to find alternate housing. There's a settlement figure in there. It's fair, given the circumstances." He paused. He straightened the folder on the table's surface, a precise, unconscious movement. "I want to be clear about something. You came into this marriage without significant assets. That's on the record. The accumulation here, the house, the accounts, the investments I've made, those are the products of my work, my career. I want to make sure we're aligned on that before we go any further." He said it without cruelty in his voice. That was the part that was hardest to carry. There was no malice in his delivery, only the flat conviction of a man who believed completely in what he was saying. Celeste looked at the folder. She did not touch it. "You came into this marriage with nothing," he said once more, in case she had missed it the first time. "I expect you to leave with the same consideration." He stood up. He picked up his phone from the table. It had been face down since he sat, which she noticed, and he was already looking at the screen as he moved toward the door. "Already on to the next thing. Derek," she said. He turned. He looked at her the way you look at a task you have completed. "Yeah, is there anything else you want to say to me?" He considered it. He shook his head, once. The way someone shakes their head at a question that seems simpler than it is. "I think the paperwork covers everything." He walked out of the kitchen. A moment later, she heard the front door close. The house held its breath. Celeste sat at the table for a long time. The folder was in front of her, white and clean, a document that had been prepared by a lawyer she had never met to describe the end of 12 years in financial terms. She didn't open it. She already knew what it would say, because she understood how attorneys who worked for people like Derek structured these things. Maximum claim on shared assets, minimum acknowledgement of the invisible labor that had made those assets possible. She understood also that there was a layer he didn't know about, a layer no document in that folder could touch, because no document in that folder acknowledged it existed. She sat until the numbness began to move through her, and then through the numbness came the grief, clean and specific. Not the ragged grief of someone who didn't know what was coming, but the precise grief of someone who did. She grieved the version of Derek that she had believed in on a lawn at a chamber reception 12 years ago. She grieved the napkin with the career plan, worn soft at the folds. She grieved the early mornings they had sat at this same table with coffee and plans, and the specific hopefulness of two people who believed they were building something together. She let herself feel all of that. Then she reached into her purse and held the compass. Nana Bea had told her once, very near the end, that the hardest thing was not the loss itself, but learning to hold it without letting it become the thing that defined you. "You can carry grief," she had said, "same as you carry anything. You just can't let it carry you." The compass was warm in her palm, steady, pointing. She put it back in her purse. She picked up her phone. Evelyn Ward answered on the second ring. "I need you to book the main conference room at Sterling National for Wednesday afternoon," Celeste said. "Full board. Chairman Caldwell present. And I need you to send an invitation to Derek's attorney with the following language. My client would like to conduct the preliminary settlement discussions at Sterling National Bank's executive offices as she has several items related to institutional holdings to discuss in that context. She paused. Use exactly that language, institutional holdings. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Are you sure about the timing? The timing is exact, Celeste said. Should I ask Chairman Caldwell to prepare anything specific? Tell him to prepare a full disclosure of the Whitmore capital structure, Celeste said. Ownership percentages, acquisition history, current assets under management, everything. Another pause. And tell him to be ready to speak about the relationship between Sterling National and Prescott and Hale Wealth Management. This time the silence from Evelyn was longer. When she spoke again, there was something in her voice that was not quite awe and not quite worry, but was closer to awe. That's going to be a significant room. I know, Celeste said. She ended the call. She stood in the kitchen and looked around it, at the counters she had chosen, the light fixture she had replaced, the curtains she had sewn, because she had wanted them a specific weight and color and couldn't find them anywhere. At the tree in the yard, wide and old, the first thing she had loved about this house. At the folder on the table, unopened, waiting. She would sign the divorce papers. She had already decided that. She was not fighting the end of the marriage. She was simply insisting that whoever was in the room on Wednesday understood exactly what they were dividing. And Derek Monroe, who had sat across from her at this table and told her she had come with nothing and would leave with nothing, was about to receive an education on the precise definition of nothing. It was going to be a very specific Wednesday. Derek's attorney called him on Monday morning with good news. She wants to settle, Paul Greer said. Greer was a family law specialist Derek had hired specifically because of his reputation for efficient dissolutions, fast, clean, minimal drama. Her side has proposed Wednesday afternoon at Sterling National Bank's executive offices. They're citing some discussion about institutional holdings. Derek had laughed at that. She doesn't have institutional holdings. I assume it's a negotiating stance, Greer said. Or she has some kind of account there. Either way, it's a bank conference room, neutral ground. These things go faster in neutral settings. You should consider bringing it. Derek considered it for about 4 seconds. Fine. Wednesday. He made 2 more calls that morning. The first was to Adrian. The second was to his mother. By that evening, the Wednesday plan had expanded. Derek wanted Diane there. She had been part of navigating this from the start, and she deserved to see it through. Adrian offered to come for moral support, and Derek accepted in the particular way that a man accepts support when he also wants an audience for the moment he believes he has earned. Kim asked if she could come, and he said yes, because it felt right to have family around for something this significant, and besides, she always knew how to document the right moments. They arrived Wednesday afternoon as a group, Derek in his best suit, Diane in a jacket she reserved for occasions called for authority, Adrian in something that was professionally appropriate and was not attempting to be anything other than exactly what she was, Kim with her phone already in her hand. They came through the revolving doors of Sterling National Bank's headquarters with the energy of people who had dressed for a victory. The building was 42 stories of glass and granite in Midtown Atlanta. The lobby was marble and silence and the subdued industry of a great deal of money being managed very carefully. A receptionist at the main desk confirmed their names and directed them to the executive elevators. Miss Monroe's guests, the receptionist said. She said it pleasantly, professionally, without any particular weight. But Diane caught the phrasing. Miss Monroe's guests, not Mr. Monroe's settlement meeting. She filed it away without commenting on it. The elevator required a keycard the receptionist provided. Top floor. Derek watched the numbers climb and felt good. He felt the way he had felt when he'd frozen the card at the Meridian, in control of the shape of the thing. He had agreed to this location, hadn't he? He had come on his own terms. Celeste had proposed the setting because she thought it gave her some kind of leverage, some kind of atmosphere. But he was Derek Monroe, SVP of Prescott and Hale, and he had been in more executive suites than she could count. A bank conference room was a bank conference room. She's probably hoping the setting intimidates us, Adrian said in the elevator. She was looking at her phone. Let her, Derek said. Kim caught Adrian's eye and they exchanged a small look that did not include Derek. The elevator opened on the 42nd floor. A wide corridor, soft lighting, a carpet that absorbed sound. A second receptionist, this one senior, with the specific composure of someone who had spent decades at the intersection of significant money and significant people, rose when they arrived. She led them to the conference room and held the door. Derek stepped in first. The room was large, a mahogany table that could seat 24, facing floor-to-ceiling windows that gave the whole of Atlanta's skyline back to you in a single view. And already seated at that table, 21 people, men and women in expensive suits, silver at their temples or younger and precise, with the particular focus of people who were accustomed to every minute of their time meaning something. Legal pads, water glasses, folders. Derek looked around the room. He counted instinctively. He recognized no one. He had expected a settlement officer, maybe a mediator, Celeste's attorney, not 21 people. "What is this?" he said. No one answered him. No one was watching him. Everyone was watching the far side of the room, a second door set into the wall, closed, waiting. Diane sat down in the nearest chair without being asked. Her knees, apparently, had made that decision. Kim's phone came up slowly, not deliberately, more like gravity had reversed, and the device just floated upward on its own. She began recording. She did not know why she began recording. Some instinct told her that this was a moment she would need to understand later. Adrian took one step back toward the door they had just come through, then stopped. Derek was still standing. He was still waiting for someone to explain the room to him, to give him a context that made the 21 people seated in front of him make sense. His attorney, Paul Greer, had followed them up and now stood beside him with an expression that was carefully neutral, in the way that attorneys' expressions are carefully neutral when they recognize that they have been given incomplete information. Then the second door opened, and everyone in that room rose to their feet. Not protocol, not the formal rising of people following procedure. This was something else, something you do instinctively without being told, when someone walks into a room and the room already knows what they're looking at. The person they were all standing for was a woman in a charcoal dress. Her hair was pulled back simply. She was carrying a purse over one shoulder and a slim leather folder in her other hand, and she walked to the head of the table, the chair at the very end, facing the skyline, and she sat down without looking at Derek at all. It took Derek a full 3 seconds to understand that he was looking at his wife. Derek made a sound that was not quite a word. It was the sound of a man encountering a gap between what he believed and what he was seeing, a gap wide enough that his brain could not immediately produce language to bridge it. "What is this?" he said. He had said that already. He said it again because he didn't have anything else yet. Celeste did not answer him. She set her folder on the table in front of her and opened it with the deliberate calm of a woman who had been in this room many times and knew exactly how to move in it. She looked across the table at the man, seated at her right, the chairman. The chairman inclined his head. Henry Caldwell was 63 years old, silver-haired, with the commanding presence of a man who had run large organizations for long enough that authority had become something he wore rather than performed. He had been chairman of Sterling National Bank for 11 years. He had known Celeste Whitmore Monroe for 9 of those 11 years, first as the controlling inner shareholder of Whitmore Capital Group, later as the architect of the bank's most significant expansion in 2 decades, and throughout as someone whose judgment he had come to respect, in a way he respected very few people's judgment. He rose from his seat and addressed the room. "Thank you all for being here on short notice." His voice was even and carried without effort. I'll be brief with the context for those who weren't previously informed about the reason for this meeting. He turned to face Derek and his group, stationed near the doorway. The woman seated at the head of this table is Celeste Whitmore Monroe. Ms. Monroe is the founder and controlling majority shareholder of Whitmore Capital Group, which holds a 61% controlling interest in Sterling National Bank and its affiliated entities. He paused. The assets under Whitmore Capital's management total approximately $2.3 trillion in consolidated value. Sterling National Bank, This building, these floors, and every employment arrangement in this institution ultimately answers to Ms. Monroe's strategic direction. She is not a client of this bank. She is the primary reason this bank exists in its current form. The room was quiet. Derek's face moved through a sequence of expressions that would have been almost instructive to catalog. Confusion first, the genuine, unbuffered confusion of someone hearing words in a familiar language that have somehow become incomprehensible. Then something that looked like searching for an alternative interpretation, scanning the room for the frame that would make this a setup or a misunderstanding. Then, the first crack of recognition, not the full recognition. Just the beginning of it, arriving like cold water. Diane's hand was on the table. Then it was off the table. Then it was in her lap, and she was looking at it as though she had forgotten it was attached to her. Kim's phone was recording. She had not made a decision to lower it, and so it stayed up. Recording. Adrian had taken a second step back toward the door. Not a dramatic movement. A very small, very precise adjustment of position. Paul Greer, Derek's attorney, had removed a pen from his jacket pocket and was holding it without any visible intention of using it. Caldwell was not finished. "I'd like to add one further piece of context," he said, "which is relevant to the discussions being conducted today." He opened the folder in front of him and looked at it briefly before looking up. Prescott and Hale Wealth Management, where Mr. Monroe serves as senior vice president, has maintained a primary institutional credit facility with Sterling National Bank for the past 6 years. This facility, totaling approximately $240 million in available capital, provides the financing that supports Prescott and Hale's operations, its investment activities, and its client service infrastructure. He set the folder down. The position Mr. Monroe currently holds exists, in part, because of capital decisions made by this institution. By this woman. A silence followed, that kind of silence, that happens not in the absence of sound, but in the presence of something that cannot be immediately spoken into. Derek's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at Celeste, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in longer than either of them would be comfortable specifying. She was watching him. There was nothing adversarial in her expression and nothing soft in it either. She looked like someone who had made a decision and was simply present for its execution. "I don't," Derek started. He stopped. He tried again. "You keep the house, you pay the bills." "You don't." He looked around the room. "This doesn't." He looked back at her. "Celeste." "Yes," she said. Her voice was exactly the same as it was every morning at breakfast, every quiet evening, every unremarkable Wednesday of 12 years. "And I keep a great deal more than that, Derek. I just never needed you to know." Adrian had made it to the wall nearest the door. Her hand was near the handle. She was not looking at Derek. She was looking at the floor. Derek saw this. His head turned. "Adrian." She looked up. For a moment they looked at each other, and something passed between them that was not love and was not strategy. It was a reckoning, the specific reckoning of someone who realizes they have miscalculated so fundamentally that the entire structure they were standing on has stopped being solid. She looked away first. Derek turned back to the table. His hands were at his sides. He had come into this room prepared to watch his wife concede. He had dressed for it. He had brought an audience for it. He was standing in the center of the room while 21 people, who ran a $2.3 trillion institution, waited for him to understand what he was looking at. Celeste opened her own folder and slid a document down the length of the table. It stopped within Derek's reach. He looked at it without picking it up. His hands were shaking slightly. "That's the ownership structure," Celeste said. "The full picture. What Whitmore Capital holds, what Sterling National manages, and the history of the Prescott and Hale credit facility." She let him look at it for a moment. "There's also a record of the anonymous transfer that covered the gap in your firm's client pitch funding 2 years ago, the one that closed the Harrington pitch. That was my money, Derek, routed quietly, because I knew what it would mean to you to believe you'd done it yourself." The paper sat on the table between them. He had the chance to pick it up. He didn't. "You said I came into this marriage with nothing," Celeste said. Her voice was steady, but not hard. I wanted you to see what nothing actually looks like from the outside. Because I have been looking at what it looked like from your side for 12 years, and I can tell you it didn't look like nothing. It looked like everything. She folded her hands on the table and waited. The room stayed with her. That was the thing Celeste had not fully anticipated. Not that the room would hold what she said, but that she would feel it holding. That the weight of 21 witnesses and Derek's shaking hands and the city spread out behind the glass would make the truth feel different than it had felt in her kitchen or her office or the guest room in the dark. More real, somehow, heavier, and also strangely lighter. She had been carrying the whole of it alone for a long time. Derek picked up the document. He put it down. She watched him read it the way someone read something they are not prepared to understand, eyes moving over words, processing failing to keep pace with syntax, having to go back and try again. She saw the moment the Prescott and Hale credit facility registered. His face changed in a specific way. Something went out in it. He was thinking about the Harrington pitch. She could tell. It had been his signature win, the pitch that had cemented his reputation at the firm, the deal that had made the SVP promotion not just possible, but inevitable. He had told the story of that deal at 4 dinner parties. He had described it as the moment he understood what he was capable of. The gap in their client pitch funding, covered at the last minute by an anonymous capital infusion he had attributed to good timing and his own credibility with smaller lenders. He understood now what it actually was. He set the document on the table and looked at her. Celeste. His voice had changed. The rehearsed measure was gone. What was left was smaller and truer, a man who had just been given a map of the territory he thought he knew, and found every landmark in the wrong place. I didn't know. I know you didn't, she said. Why didn't you tell me? She looked at him for a long moment, before answering. When she spoke, her voice was careful with the weight of it, because I wanted you to choose me first, before the numbers, before you knew what it meant. I wanted. She stopped. She started again. I wanted to be loved for what I was before anyone could tell you what I was worth. A pause. That's what I wanted from the beginning. That's what I always wanted. He was still looking at her. His eyes were wet. This surprised her, not because it was impossible, but because she had not seen him cry in years, and she had forgotten that it was something he was capable of. I froze the card, he said. A statement, not a question. Yes. On purpose. Yes, at the Meridian. He looked at the table. That card is a Sterling National card. Yes. He made a sound that had no name. The sound a person makes when they are standing in the wreckage of their own plan and seeing for the first time what the wreckage is made of. She had expected the moment to feel like something, and it did, but not what she expected. It felt like the end of something that had been ending for a long time. Not a snap, a release. Behind Derek, Adrian had reached the door. She didn't slam it or make a statement. She simply opened it, the way you open a door when you have finally decided that the room you're in is not the room for you, and she walked out. The door closed quietly behind her. Derek heard it close. He didn't turn. Diane was seated, very still, in the chair she had dropped into when the chairman began speaking. Her hands were in her lap. She was looking at them with an attention that suggested the view was not interesting, but that it was preferable to looking up. Kim had lowered her phone at some point. She couldn't have told you exactly when. The recording was still running. She hadn't remembered to stop it, but her hand was at her side and the screen was facing the carpet. Celeste reached into her purse. She found the compass without looking. She held it in her palm, below the edge of the table where no one could see it, and she pressed her thumb into the worn brass on the smooth side, and she let herself feel what she felt. It was large. It was a large thing to feel. She had given 12 years to this man, and had believed in him through failures he didn't know she was quietly insulating against, and he had sat across from her at a kitchen table in his best suit and told her she had come with nothing. She let herself feel that. All of it. Then she let it go. She raised her eyes and looked at Derek across the long table. I would have paid that bill 1,000 times over, she said. Her voice caught once. Just a tremor, just a breath, gladly, if you had just loved me. That's all I ever wanted from you, Derek. Not the title, not the office, not the acknowledgement of anything I built, just to be loved by the man I believed in. He opened his mouth. He closed it. You sat across from me at our kitchen table, she said, and you told me I came with nothing, and you were telling the truth about what you saw. You only ever saw what I showed you, and I showed you what I thought was enough, that I was steady, that I was faithful, that I showed up. I thought that would be enough for you to see me. She paused. It wasn't enough. Celeste, his voice broke on the word. I'm not saying this to punish you, she said. I'm saying it because I need you to understand exactly what you had, and what you chose to do with it. She closed her folder and placed it in her leather case. Your attorney has the divorce paperwork. I'll sign it this week. My attorney will contact yours about the terms. She stood. She lifted her purse onto her shoulder and felt, one last time, the weight of the compass in her hand. She put it back in the purse. I want to say one more thing, she said. She looked at Derek and then, because it needed to be said, she looked at Diane. I am not angry at either of you. I've had a long time to arrive at this moment, and what I've arrived at is not anger, a beat. What I've arrived at is that I deserve better than what this was, and I'm going to go find it. She buttoned her jacket. She walked out of the boardroom without looking back. Behind her, through the closed door, she heard the room begin to move, the sound of chairs and voices, and the particular industry of 21 people who had just watched something they would not forget. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She stood in the hall while the floor numbers changed. When the doors opened, she stepped in. She rode down alone. 42 floors of glass moving past the windows, the city falling away and then returning, and in her hand, pressed into her palm by simple habit, the brass compass. True north, pointing. She walked out of the building into the afternoon light. The consequences did not arrive all at once. That was not how consequences worked, in Celeste's experience. They arrived the way the tide arrived, incrementally, steadily, and in the end, everywhere. The first thing to move was Prescott and Hale. Evelyn Ward sent a routine communications to Sterling National's Institutional Lending Division on Thursday morning. A standard review request. The kind of letter that arrived periodically and meant nothing unusual on its own. The division forwarded it upward as protocol required. And by Friday afternoon it had reached a senior desk where someone who understood context looked at the Prescott and Hale file and noticed that the review coincided with the conclusion of a board meeting she had attended on Wednesday afternoon. The review was not punitive. It was not designed to destroy. It was simply a standard reassessment of credit terms, which institutions conducted regularly and which the borrowing firm was required to respond to. But the timing sent a message to anyone in the building paying attention, and some people were paying attention. Derek called Celeste on Saturday morning. She answered on the third ring. She had been standing in the kitchen with coffee, looking at the maple tree in the yard, which had begun to turn at the edges, the first gold of autumn moving in from the margins. Celeste, he said. His voice had the specific texture of a man who had not been sleeping well. Derek, I need to understand what's happening at the firm. There's a credit review. I know, she said. Silence. Is this? He stopped. He tried again. Are you doing this? She thought about how to answer that. I haven't directed anything against you personally, she said. What I've done is stop protecting you from normal institutional processes that your firm should have been subject to all along. She paused. The review is standard. What happens as a result of it is between your firm and the bank. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing, the breath of a man adjusting, recalibrating, arriving at a new map of the territory. I didn't know, he said. He had said this in the boardroom too. She believed him both times. Not knowing hadn't stopped him from doing what he'd done, but she believed it was true. I know you didn't, she said. Same as before. If I had known, she let him finish it in his own head. She had been a wife long enough to know that the sentence that began with, if I had known, almost never led somewhere useful. He would fill in the end with something that made it easier for him to carry, and the end he filled in would not be the truth, because the truth was that she had been there all along, every day, and what he had not known was not a secret she had hidden. What he had not known was her. She let the pause be what it was. I hope things work out at the firm, she said. It was true when she said it. She did not want to watch him fall apart. She had never wanted that. She wanted what she had always wanted, simply to have been seen before it came to this. She said goodbye. She set the phone down gently on the kitchen counter. From that week forward, Adrian did not contact Derek. She did not send a message, or make a call, or acknowledge in any way the events of the previous months. She was gone in the way that people are gone, when they were never present in the way they appeared, when what they wanted was not the person but the position, and the position had shifted. Derek made 3 attempts to reach her. She did not respond. Diane's absence was different. Diane did not vanish. She went quiet in the way of a person who is waiting to see which way the wind will settle before they commit to a direction. The family group chat, which had been reliably active through the whole of the previous weeks, went still. The aunts and cousins and distant relatives who had liked Kim's posts and reacted to the family chat messages found themselves, in the quiet that followed, reassessing what they had actually witnessed. The picture clarified slowly. The woman they had laughed at was not what they had been told she was. The question that followed, who had they been listening to, was not a comfortable one, and it settled differently in different people. Kim sat with her recording for 2 days before she watched it again. She watched the part where the chairman explained what Whitmore Capital was. She watched the part where Adrian began moving toward the door. She watched the part where Celeste spoke, the voice that caught once, just once, and then held, and said the words that she had carried into that room alone. Kim had come into this with a phone and a certainty about which side she was supposed to be on. She watched the recording 3 times. She did not post it. She archived it. She did not know what she would do with it, but she understood that it was not a weapon anymore. It was a record of something she had been present for and had not understood until afterward. She texted Celeste on Sunday, just, "I'm sorry." Celeste did not respond immediately. When she did, 2 days later, she sent, "I know. Thank you." She offered nothing else and was not unkind. There was one more thing Celeste decided. She told Evelyn to ensure that the credit review at Prescott and Hale resulted in a restructured arrangement rather than a termination, a tighter facility, higher scrutiny, but still functional. It was not generosity toward Derek specifically. It was a decision she made from the same place she made most of her decisions, from a long view, with the understanding that she was not in the business of destruction. She was in the business of balance. Nana Bay's a word, her word, carried forward from a seamstress's kitchen in Alabama to a 42nd floor boardroom in Atlanta and back out again into the ordinary afternoon light. Derek would keep enough to rebuild. She would see to that, not because he had earned it, but because she had decided a long time ago what of woman she was going to be. That was the thing they had never understood about her. The quiet, the plain dresses, the absence of announcement. It had never been weakness. It had never been poverty of self. It had been the specific discipline of a woman who knew her north and moved toward it without needing the room to watch. The room had watched now, and the balance had come back around, the same way Nana Bea had always said it would. Steadily. In the end, everywhere, a season passed. Celeste moved into her own space in October. Not a house, not yet. A set of rooms in a quiet building in Buckhead, high enough to see the city clearly in both directions, with light in the mornings and good trees visible from the kitchen window. She chose it for the same reason she had once chosen a house on the basis of a single maple tree, because it made her feel that something around her was alive and paying attention to the light. She set the brass compass on the kitchen counter the first morning. It sat there the way it always had, present, functional, undemanding of acknowledgement. She had begun the process of taking Whitmore Capital public in a very specific way, not in the financial press, not in the sort of announcement that arrived accompanied by industry fanfare, but in her own name, in her own time, in a structure that made it clear who had built the thing and why. The reasoning was not personal. It was simply that she had spent a long time hiding for someone else's comfort, and that particular reason was no longer present. The hiding had been for Derek, for the marriage, for the version of their relationship that depended on him not knowing what he was standing next to. Now that relationship was closed, and there was no good reason left to keep the lights off. On a Thursday morning in November, she met Evelyn Ward for coffee at a place near the Buckhead office Celeste had recently signed a lease on. A small meeting. A quiet table near the window. The kind of conversation that looked, from the outside, like two women catching up, which it also was. "Do you have any regrets?" Evelyn asked. She asked it the way she asked most things, directly, without softening it into something easier to receive, because she understood that Celeste did not need things softened. Celeste considered the question. "I regret believing that love had to prove itself through concealment," she said, after a moment. "I thought if I hid what I had, he would find what I was." "But you can't reach someone by making yourself smaller. That's not generosity. That's just loneliness with a better story attached to it." She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. "I don't regret what I built. I don't regret the 14 years of work. I regret thinking I had to hide it in order to be loved." Evelyn nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment, in the way she didn't say things when she was doing Celeste the courtesy of not rushing her. "What's next?" Evelyn asked. Celeste opened the leather folder she had brought with her and slid a single page across the table. Evelyn looked at it. It was a proposed charter for a foundation, the Beatrice Whitmore Fund for Women in Finance. Mentorship, capital access, and seed funding for first-generation women, who were in the position Celeste had been in at 24. One good idea and no infrastructure around them to catch on it. "That's a significant commitment," Evelyn said. "It's the right one," Celeste said. She walked back to her new office afterward through the cool November air and the low gold light of Atlanta in autumn. The city moved around her at its usual pace, traffic and conversation, and the particular energy of a place that does not pause for anyone's private reckoning. Not one person on the sidewalk knew who she was. That was fine. It had always been fine. She had never needed that particular kind of knowing. She reached the building. The lobby was new to her still, the light, the sound of it, the specific quiet of a space that was entirely her own. She rode the elevator up. She unlocked her office and went to the window and looked out at the city she had worked in for almost 2 decades, mostly in silence, mostly unseen. In her purse, the compass. She took it out and set it on the windowsill. The needle moved once, twice, then found its rest. True north, the same direction it had always pointed, through every hard year and every quiet victory, through the grief and the boardroom and the season that had passed and the one that was coming. It had never steered her wrong. She had never needed it to. She put the compass on her desk, not back in the purse, here. In plain sight, in the space where she worked, with her name on the door and the city visible behind her. Some things you carry, some things you set down. And the difference between the two, Nana Bea had always said, was knowing which was which. Celeste knew. She opened her laptop and started the next chapter. If you found yourself rooting for her from the very beginning, I think you already know why. Leave a comment and tell me, was Celeste right to wait as long as she did? And if you haven't already, subscribe, because the next story is already here, and it's waiting for you.